ethical way to get them to do what you want them to do.
Welcome to Fordify Live with your host, Ford Saeks.
Well, to help answer that question is an expert in leadership and culture and group dynamics. It's Anita Greenwood. You can find her if you're listening to the podcast. You can find her at powerhouse-leaders.com. She's a strategic executive coach and keynote speaker. Anita Greenwood, welcome to Fordify Live. We're live right now on Facebook and LinkedIn and YouTube. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
So tell our listeners a little bit about you, your accent, where are you from? Where did you get this wisdom and knowledge from?
Well, I was born in England, and I guess I acquired this wisdom and knowledge through working. I've lived in 3 different countries, and I've worked in about 40 different countries in differing positions of leadership. So I guess I'm pretty wise because I've hit a few walls in a few different languages, and now I know how to tell the story and help people avoid those walls.
So when we talked about in the teaser for the episode today about influencing others in an ethical way, which could, be leadership and communication. And so this is going to be applicable to you today, whether you're a C-level executive, or a team manager, a leader, or even a staff person. So what does it come down to? How do we influence others in a way, or what are some of the challenges that people have in communication and influence?
Mm-hmm. I think it really comes down to understanding what other people want. It's really easy to direct people and to get them to do what you want short term. But if you want people to follow you long term, you have to be a lot more strategic about your leadership.
So what are some of the things that I can do to be more strategic? What are some of the things that you talk about when you do a training or you work with a consulting client? Where do you start? Like, what's the journey look like?
Yeah. Well, the first thing you start with is learning about yourself, knowing what you bring to the party, knowing who you are as a leader, and knowing what strengths you have and what could trigger other people. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is learning more about the person you're talking to, learning about their strengths, what they're interested in, what they're motivated in, and then building bridges between the two and seeing where you've got common interest. I mean, that sounds really basic, but you wouldn't believe how many people don't go through that initial phase of, who am I? What do I bring to the table? Who are they? What do they want to bring to the table? And how can we work together effectively?
Well, what is your take on assessments? So for me, I'm a keynote speaker, work with franchise brands and organizations. We do public events, and you and I are actually doing a public event coming up here soon. It's an interactive business event for business owners that are trying to address their top challenges, and appreciate you being on the show today. When it comes to identifying who you are, now for me, I use assessments, and I've used assessments over the years to help identify. Now, I don't call them tests. Some people call them tests. It's not a pass-fail. But what have you found in your organizations? Do you recommend that you start to try to identify where people are by using a third-party tool? And if so, what are the pros and cons?
Oh, yeah. I think I've done every single test that is possible to do, actually. And I've done most of them more than once because I've always wanted to be sure when I recommend anything to anyone, I know exactly what I'm talking about. So what I do is how I equate it is a bit like a person is a bit like an iceberg. And I think about what's on the top of the iceberg, so above the level of the water, and then what's below it. So personally, for the top part above the iceberg, I like to use a Myers-Briggs. I think the Myers-Briggs assessment is a really good take on how somebody shows up. And the Myers-Briggs can evolve over time as you show up in different ways for different positions. I personally have evolved in my Myers-Briggs style 3 times, and it's often been related to the leadership growth that I've had in those times. And then underneath the iceberg, for me, that's the stuff that people don't see. And so you can have lots of people. I have a lot of ENTJs who come to me for coaching. That means they're the commander. They know what they want to do. But underneath that, I need to know what's driving that. So I actually use something called the Core Values Index. And that really helps me understand how they are wired for success. What's going to be their strength? What's going to trigger them? And then based on those two things, I can understand also with the help of 360 assessments. The 360 and the Myers-Briggs helps me understand how people are showing up. And then the stuff underneath in the core values index and what's the conversations helps me understand what's really meaningful to a leader. Because I think if we're showing up in a way and then our core values are different, that can cause inconsistency. And then someone doesn't lead in a way that is naturally authentic to them. And then that can cause challenges for them, but also for those who follow them.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I recommend, regardless if you're listening to this today or watching this live, assessments are great tools, but they're just a tool. They're not a pass fail. And we're not endorsing any one assessment for the purposes of this is for educational and informational purposes only. But certainly assessments are a great way to start if you're doing any type of leadership, culture, transformations, sales training, anything. You need to do a benchmark, right? We always want to know where we are and where we're going to go. And then, you've talked about in the work you and I have done together about minding the gap, which of course is more of a British term of when you're on the subway, minding the gap. But for those Americans or the people that might not know what that term is, what is really minding the gap? So now they've done the assessment, they've got some of the information, but it's really about the interpretation of the data and then an action plan. So how do they mind the gap?
For me, it's all about where are you today and where do you want to go? So as a coach, I always start at the end, what's the end game? Where do you want to be? Who do you want to be? What is the brand you want to be as a successful leader long term? So you start there. Then you go back, well, this is where I am today. This is where I want to be. And the bit in the middle is the gap. So minding the gap is understanding what's between you and being a more effective leader. What's between you and being able to listen actively to the people you work with? What's between you and showing up in a way that people say, wow, I want to follow this person. And if you don't know where you are and you don't know who you are trying to serve, it's very hard to understand what's in the gap. So gap is a custom strategy, and it's really intentional. So it's an intentional decision to go from where I am today to where I want to be. And like I said, the word intentional is really key, because you don't just wake up one day and say, oh, I want to be better at X and do it. You have to decide what it is, 3 key things that you want to improve. Then you create strategies to improve those things. The assessments you talked about can help, but they're obviously just a part of it. And then after that gap, there are some things. One of the pitfalls is, you hear all the same about, well, don't do the same thing and expect different results. In order to get different results, you have to experiment. You have to have different strategies, and you have to accept to try something and know that it might not work. But then you get data points on you as a leader and say, well, that worked really well. I'm going to try that again. Or, shoot, that didn't quite work how I thought, but I've gathered data to see how I can do this differently. And that gap, I think the thing about the gap as a leader is that there is some ambiguity, there is uncertainty, there's a lot of experimentation, but it's the only way to get to the new place that you want to get to. You can't continue being anchored to your comfort zone, to what's familiar. You've really got to start doing different things and have somebody to challenge you. And I think that's my role in the gap, is I will hold somebody's hand while they navigate the gap. I'm not gonna, and I'll encourage them and I'll give them a little nudge and a kick up the backside sometimes if needed. But sometimes that gap is the thing between you and just so much, not only success, but much more happiness, fulfillment, not only for you, but the culture of the organization that you work for. Because I believe that it's a leader who drives the organization. And when you start pushing yourself, it's incredible how you see people work for you start to push themselves too.
Yeah, I know when the work I do before I speak, I'll always ask what the top challenges are facing your organization. And inevitably, it's finding, attracting, engaging, and retaining top talent. And when we talk about those subjects, unfortunately, a lot of organizations use those terms interchangeably, and they get confused of leadership and management and team building and culture and all these different things. And I think at the end of the day, as anybody who's watched this or listened to this has probably heard, people don't leave companies, they leave bosses, they leave cultures.
Yeah.
And so if they're not happy, you can throw money and lunch and learns and other activities towards a team. But if they don't feel valued and appreciated, it's hard to keep them. And I know I've suffered from that as a CEO myself. At the end of the day, I want performance. I want things done. And I typically go straight to the target because I'm a driver. And I'm like, okay, we need to get this done. But it also takes a team member of get it done with details, get it done right. And so the intents are, get it done, get along, have fun, socialize. And so how do you, what I look at when not only in my organization as Prime Concepts, but also the organizations that I work with and the ones that you work with when you're being hired as a speaker, we have to meet them where they are and make sure they're open-minded and coachable, because sometimes you can deliver the solution, but if they're not open-minded and coachable, then all the training in the world won't work. And people think, well, I did a DISC profile, or I did Myers-Briggs, or I did emotional intelligence, or I did workplace strengths, but it changes, like you said, over time. And so an action step for the listeners today is, if you haven't done that either for yourself or for your key team members, now's the time to look at which assessment you want to use. Now, obviously, I have assessments at ProfitRichResults.com. I'm a reseller for DISC and BIRDS and workplace strengths, because those are the ones that I use. But certainly, you should know where you are. And then have you really created a clear vision? What do you do when you work with leaders to help them create a vision so they know what that gap is? What are some of the steps or strategies that you could share with the listeners if they're struggling and they need a more clear vision?
Yeah, I consider that everybody has a powerhouse version of themselves. So we have the little version of ourselves who is going to play small, and we have the powerhouse version of ourselves who is going to be that ethical leader that we've talked about, somebody who's going to be a visionary, who's going to really empower others, who is really the super version of ourselves. And so what I do with my clients is I help them identify that vision of who they want to be as a leader. And I do that in several ways. It's just asking them who they admire, people who are real, people who are, it can be a superhero. I have a lot of women who identify with Wonder Woman. There's guys who've identified with Colin Powell or, you name it. But there's something, or a coach, a sports coach, Andy Reid, Chiefs, it's like, why does this person motivate you? What is it about them? Or what is it about that image, whether it's Wonder Woman or whether it's a woman performing on a stage? There's something about the characteristics of that individual as a leader that person finds empowering. And so if you can see it and you can know what it feels like, then you can start to be it. And so for me, leadership development is not just about assessments, because they're more technical.
Right.
For me, it's about how you feel and how other people feel when they're with you, and the energy. I'm all about what energy you bring to the room. So when I talked about the lower part of the iceberg, it's like some people have this powerful energy and they just so want to change things. And then the part on the top of the iceberg that shows up comes across as them being obnoxious, difficult to work with, micromanaging, whatever. And then when they understand, well, I want to be this type of leader, it's like, well, perhaps today you're showing up as this type of leader. And then we have to figure out, again, what's in the gap? How do you close it? And what can you work on to be the highest possible version of yourself? Knowing it's going to take time. It's like powerlifting. You don't lift, I certainly don't lift 50 pounds in each hand, or, even today. But in the beginning, 5 pounds seemed high. It's like, oh my gosh, I can't lift that. Then 10 pounds, it's like, oh, I can do this. Then 15, then 20. Leadership's the same. You have to push yourself to become more powerful in the areas that you want. And knowing that it is going to take you time. And not everybody's going to like everything you do, but you have to decide strategically what you want to be known for.
Yeah,
Organization.
No, I agree. I've said this so many times on my episodes, and even today on this one. Training isn't something you did; it's something you do. It's ongoing. There's a continual curve. It's not a destination. Okay, I've been trained and I'm a great leader. I listen to audio on the way to work, on the way home, when I'm working out. I'm listening to a variety of authors and Audible books and Kindle books on airplanes because I spend a lot of time on airplanes. And so, it's about continuing learning. So, creating an environment that is inclusive and includes feedback loops. I mean, I've probably been a victim of creating not enough structure. Like I create an open environment where people can pretty much do and say what they want because I'm interested in that feedback. I don't believe that my way is the highway. I do if I've already gotten the feedback and I make a decision, then it's like, okay, we're moving forward now. This is the direction we're going in. But I really like to encourage a cohesive, collaborative environment. And it's different when you have people that have come from other companies and then they come and they join my company and they're in a different environment. And they realize that they can say what they think or what they say matters. And it's really interesting because I've had people say to me, I really value working here because my last boss never listened to anything I said. And so it's like, really, why wouldn't you listen to it? So it seems natural to me, but just like leadership comes natural to you. Right. And so for those of you listening, take a good look at your organization from the outside. I mean, there's your belief, there's your staff's belief, and then there's the public's belief or the culture's belief. And getting in alignment with those three things are important, especially with diverse workplaces of different generations in the marketplace with Gen X, Gen Y, millennials, traditionalists, boomers, the connected generation. There's so many different dynamics going on. And now with the culture and the economy and everything. So, leadership is something that whether you're a solopreneur or a big company.
Yeah. And I want to come back to what you said in the beginning, influencing people in an ethical way. And I don't want to just put this all on the companies, right? Because there's so much a company can do. But I'm all about leadership, right? And so my thought is, okay, what can the company do to help me? But what can I do as a powerful leader who wants to grow in an organization? How can I understand what the company wants? If I want to influence change, what do I need to do for me so I can be an empowered leader? Who do I need to connect with? Which alliances do I need to build? What trainings do I need to have? What industry knowledge do I not currently have that I need to acquire? How do I get myself to be listened to? I talk to a lot of leaders and I say, okay, well, what is your pitch? What if you want $10 million for a certain project? What is it you're doing to ask for your $10 million? Or you want 3 more headcount? Okay, what are you asking for? And how do you ask for it? And I listen to those and I'm like, and what did they say? And they say, well, they're just saying no. And I'm not surprised. I'd say no too. It's like, what's the big picture? What is the difference? How much revenue is the company going to get if you do this? How much revenue is the company losing if you don't do it? That's another gap forward. Thinking about minding the gap. For me, that's what comes together. It's, as a leader, what is your gap between the leader you are today and the leader you want to be tomorrow? But how can you be really successful is when you say, this is my journey as a leader, but this is the journey of the company from where the company is today to where the company wants to go. Then you bring the two together and you work on yourself and what you want as a leader, and you make sure that it also helps the company achieve what they want. If you have a really good story, nobody's going to deny you $10 million if you're going to make enough money to make sure that that ROI is considerable. So I come back to influencing skills are essential for a powerful leader.
Yeah, and if you're listening to this again on the podcast, this is Anita Greenwood, keynote speaker and strategic leadership executive coach at powerhouse-leaders, which is plural.com. So powerhouse-leaders.com. So we go live every Wednesdays at 11 a.m. Central on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook. And we've been talking about leadership and influence and assessments and all these things. And when it comes to me for ethical leadership, especially since I'm known for strategic marketing and branding and value propositions, when I work with a company, I always want to look at the same with two things. Same thing I would do as an employer if I was looking at getting a better job or making an influence or a pitch or whatever it was. It comes down to two things: the economics and the emotions. So like you just said, if they're going to make a proposal and they want funding or they want something and maybe they're a nonprofit, what's the economics, the gap of if they do and they don't do it? And what's the emotional gap if they do and don't do it? Because decision-making is done on both of those sides. It's obviously done emotional first. People make decisions emotionally, and then they justify them logically. So I don't want to change the topic of today from, leadership and culture to sales. But if you want to influence decision-making, it's not manipulative. It's giving people enough of the right information that they can make good decisions.
Yeah. And the thing I hear a lot, Ford, is people who say, but I don't want to do sales. And it's like we sell ourselves every single day. I went to one of my children's parent-teacher conferences today. Even as a parent, I'm selling myself in a parent-teacher conference because I want the teachers to love my kids. Right. Every single thing you do is selling yourself to a certain degree, because if you want to pass a message across to somebody, you've got to give a message that they can receive in a way they want to hear it. And that's influence, but it's also sales. It's the same thing.
To me, communication is the response that elicits. For those of you that have ever been married or have a significant other, we know there's a difference of intent versus perception. So, but it's really all about the perception. I mean, you can have the best intents in the world, but if it's not perceived that way and it doesn't create that impact, it's certainly going to be a challenge. Well, any closing thoughts you have for our listeners of Fordify Live and the Business Growth Show?
I think the impact is what it's all about. What's the impact you want to create as a leader? What's the impact you want to create in the company? How can you bring those together to be a real powerhouse leader?
Well, thank you so much, Anita. I love working together. We've collaborated on clients before and shared the stage at events. This is Ford Saeks with Fordify Live. Join me next Wednesday at 11 a.m. Central for another episode of Fordify Live. Bye, everybody.
Thank you for tuning in to Fordify Live. Make sure to like, comment, and share this episode on your favorite streaming platform. And don't forget to subscribe to the Business Growth Show podcast, available wherever you get your podcast streaming fix. We air weekly at 11 a.m. Central Time, and trust me, you won't want to miss a beat. So until next week, keep pushing the boundaries and never stop growing.